Hello geographers, welcome to this CAT help session video giving you some pointers about the two questions that you've got on your physical geography CAT for this week. First question is a 4-mark question, outline the causes of a storm surge. So if we start by unpicking firstly maybe what the command word is asking us to do. Hopefully we are familiar with this by now, but outline is really asking us to briefly describe or explain. That's what this sort of question is asking us to do. So we don't need to go into loads of detail, but we do need to give a nice clear description or explanation of something. In this case, the causes of a storm surge. Now, if you remember, a storm surge is a kind of wall of water which is associated with tropical storms. So if you think about the examples that we've learnt about, Hurricane Sandy, Typhoon Haiyan, both of those have experienced quite large storm surges. So we can explain these as being a wall of water associated with tropical storms. Maybe you need to go back into your notes and have a little look at the causes of them. But there are basically two things to consider. You want to consider the role of the air pressure. What is that doing to help trigger a storm surge? And you want to also think about the role of the wind. That is also very important in causing a storm surge. You may also want to consider maybe how the coastline impacts the characteristics of that storm surge. Again, if we link back to the examples that we've looked at, both of those regions had quite interesting coastal geography, which meant that the storm surge in those places was amplified. Final thing to remember, for a 4-mark question, we want to make sure that we are giving 4 distinct points. Okay, so we want to say 4 things, or really kind of make a point and then develop it with some evidence or an example or something like that. But we want to make sure that we have got kind of 4 distinct ideas within our answer. Okay, and then if we turn our attention to the second question, we've got a 6-mark question here, and this type of question is an analysis question, an analyze question, where we really just want to be focusing on the data that is shown in front of us. So in this case, in figures 7 and 8. So we don't need to give any explanations. We don't need to be explaining any patterns or offering any reasons. The key sort of theme we want to remember for this sort of question is the acronym T. I've come across this before. Okay, the T stands for trends or patterns. What can you see in terms of things like highest or lowest or differences, that kind of thing. E stands for evidence. So we want to be using some evidence from the table, and in particular we want to be manipulating that evidence. So we want to be working out differences or increases, decreases, that kind of thing. And A stands for anomalies. So we want to have a look for anything within the data that doesn't fit the trend or pattern that we mentioned a moment ago. Looking specifically at this question then, because this format applies to all of these 6-mark analyse questions. If we have a look, it's giving us some information here. So figure 7 shows tropical storm basins where storms occur on a regular basis. It's simply really a way of us understanding the locations of the areas that it mentions down here. Okay, so area 1, for example, the Atlantic, it shows us where that is on the map, the Northeast Pacific, the Northwest Pacific, and so on. So this is helping us to understand this pattern here. Okay, figure 8 shows data about the frequency of storm events. Now the frequency, remember, that is referring to the number of events. So it doesn't give us any indication about the intensity of those events. It doesn't hint at how strong those storms are, what category they are in the Saffir-Simpson scale. It only hints at the frequency of those events. And it gives us the data between 1981 and 2010. So what we need to be doing is looking through this data and as I said earlier, trying to pick out some of the trends and support that with some evidence. So for example, we might look at each of these columns one at a time. So we might consider, is there any pattern to where is experiencing the most storms in any one particular year? Remember that in each case we've actually got kind of the opportunity to combine some of these figures. So we've got the Northeast Pacific and the Northwest Pacific. What do we notice if we combine those two numbers together, for example? How much bigger is that number than this one here, or how much smaller is this one than this one? So we want to be able to work out some differences, try and spot some trends or patterns within that data. Same for this column here. Think about maybe how we can combine some of those numbers together, how we can think about how they're different between other ocean basins. Maybe also then start to see what links we notice between the years. So how it varies from the least in one year to the most. How does it vary, for example, between those two columns? Or maybe then when we start looking at the averages, what we notice about how these averages vary and how the averages compare to the most or least, for example. So we might have, in this case, two ocean basins that have quite a similar average. So an average here, for example, of 6.4 and an average here of 5. Okay, not much of a difference between those averages, but quite a big difference between the range of storms. So remember, we're trying to look at the intricate kind of patterns or trends within that data. As I said before, we don't need to worry about trying to explain the patterns. So I'm not expecting you to be able to tell me why one ocean basin might get more or fewer storms. We're not interested in that. This is a purely skills-based task where we really want to unpick as many of the trends and patterns that we can see in this data as possible.